Okay, we will get started. Tonight is our Bountiful City work session, Tuesday, October 10th, and we appreciate you being here tonight. We are going to discuss a Lumen franchise agreement, and we will turn the time over to Gary Hill.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I will do a brief intro to the subject, and then I'm going to turn the time over to Alan to talk about some of the details. And then we'd like to answer any questions you have. But in summary, we have Lumen, who was formerly called CenturyLink, who before that had various other names dating all the way back to Mountain States Telephone and Telegraph, who has provided telecommunication services in the city for years and years, telephone lines, essentially. And then as technology has changed, they've deployed different kinds of telecommunication lines in the city. We have a pole attachment agreement that governs a portion of their work that dates back to 1936. And then the most recent franchise agreement that we could find with them for telecommunications was in 1965. Earlier this year, they began a process of bringing fiber to residences citywide, but we discovered along with them mutually that they do not have a franchise agreement to be able to provide those services in the city. So before they can continue, a franchise agreement needs to be executed between them and us. It gave us the opportunity when that came to light to be able to talk about some of the issues that we've had with them over the years relative to their telecommunications facilities. A lot of them relate to how they interact with our power system. Back in the day, we shared a lot of poles and infrastructure strung across those poles. As time has gone on, however, they have, despite the pole attachment agreement, we've had a hard time having them be responsive to our requests to remove those pole attachments, to remove poles. We've added poles to our system that have required them to move their facilities onto our poles, and Alan can talk more about how many of those requests we've made over the years and how many there are still that are left undone. It's also some of the method of installation is concerning. And one of the problems with them simply leaving their poles and their facilities on old poles is that in the event of a windstorm, for example, if somebody sees a line hanging down, most residents assume that's a power line. So we get the call, we respond, we spend time, resources, staff time to investigate and find out, no, this isn't us, this is them. And it's not even an active line, or they aren't in a hurry to fix it. And so what they are proposing is that through this franchise agreement that they will clean up all of the outstanding areas that they have not cleaned up to this point as they go through the city. We have some concerns with that. And we were frank with them in a recent meeting, Alan and I. Maybe I can ask Alan to come up now to the podium, but we were pretty direct with them about our lack of confidence in their ability to perform, and we'll share some of the reasons why. But before we enter into a franchise agreement with them, there are some specific performance requirements that as city staff we recommend be included in that. Alan, maybe if you don't mind, you could talk a little bit about what you've got prepared.
Yeah, I've got a handful of pictures here. I don't know if you want me to go through to kind of, picture's worth 1,000 words when you start talking about it here. So we'll see if I can bring it up. And like I say, this is not a long presentation. It just is. It was the easiest way for me to put pictures in here. So anyway, one of the first things is the pole transfers, and these are just a couple shots where we see them all over the city where we've got new poles and there's another pole sitting next to them. Talking a little bit about, as Gary was saying, the unresponsiveness of both CenturyLink and Comcast. We're having trouble really with both of them. CenturyLink is the worst, but Comcast is not perfect either. I just want to say, is that when, oh, I was gonna say that wasn't me. Anyway, so as you look at it, you're gonna come back in here and we'll set a new pole, we'll transfer it, And then you'll look on here and you can see where there's the 2 wires on here. So you really have got to get the cable company to go first and then CenturyLink come in afterwards. And they can't move until the cable company's out of the way. As they come back in, they have got a system that they devised where they go back in and we notify them of what it is. And is notified, sometimes there might be 1 pole, or we might do a block where there might be 10 or 12 poles in it. So we've got roughly 158 notifications in, but we have got close to 400 poles that they are behind. So we've got 400 of these little stub poles, for lack of a better word, that are sitting around there. Like I say, as we talk back in through it, we're concerned that we need to get those cleaned up, because we get a lot of phone calls and we try calling, but it's, people want to get them out of their yard. They're great that we have data, but they want to come back through it. The other thing we have is, you can see in here in the little red circle there, you can see where the cable is. The concern that we have is as they're coming back in here and they're looking at now wanting to put fiber. So they're not necessarily looking at taking old cables down, although in our meeting suggested that they would look at doing that. But now they're looking at putting additional fibers back on top of what it is. And you can see in here how big this cable is. There's a pretty good sized cable. It's got copper wires in it that's hanging in here. And what they're really proposing to do is they upgrade it. They don't take the old stuff down, and I'll show you kind of what a lashing machine looks like. But they'll put it up here, lay the new cable, lash it on, and then they move on. And what ends up happening is we get more weight. And what we have on our poles, and again, as we talk about our poles, which we've talked about for years, a lot of our poles were put in the 60s and 50s. They're past the point. So as we start putting more weight onto it, we have the issues when the winds come or the snows come, that we don't want to take any more responsibility for additional weight onto the system. So we basically have told them we can't put more onto you unless you're going to take something off. But this is just a picture, and there are others through the city that are that way. These unused cables. Again, you can see where some of their cables get to be pretty decent size. You can see this dark one on the bottom here. Now, this is an area that's one we've just rebuilt. It's got steel poles, so it's a heavy pole, but you can see how much weight they actually get on here. And then this loop in here, as you can see the little half loop thing here, right up into this area here. I'm sorry, Cicely, you probably can't see that. What they call them, they do fiber, they put storage in here. So you end up with this additional weight. Again, it brings you more additional wind loading and snow loading. Just as a picture of what that is. This is when they're talking about putting in lashing. This, apologize, this is not necessarily a great, I should have better pictures of this. I've seen it done. But you'll see they'll climb a pole or get on here, and you'll notice the palm trees. This is not Bountiful, just but they'll get up here, they hook this machine on, and then you can see the cable that's drooping down there. When they do it in the backyard, they'll go put little pulleys and it just sort of loops and clean there. And then they'll pull this machine, and what it does is it spins a metal wire around it, and what they call lashes it, that puts that cable up onto it. And you can do it here because it's a small one, but they can actually lash up on top of the larger cables that we were looking at before. They just add that back on and lash over. In order to get that down, you have got to actually remove that little wire and spin this how many times for 200 feet between each pole to get it back off. So it's a really labor-intensive process to unlash a cable, which is why they don't want to do that, that they just want to lash up and over the top of it. I'll figure out how to get back to the next one here. Again, this was just a picture where you can see the lashing has come undone. And if you had better pictures, you could see there's the little metal things where a lot of times this happens if lightning hits it or if our lines spark together or it comes undone and the cables will droop down. This is some of the things that you run into. And this is just, I mean, this happened, but it's, you can see where this wire is hanging down off of the messenger, which is just something to point out, something that we have to deal with lashings. And I was gonna say, Luke is going to show you on our GIS what you've got as far as how we've kept track of where it is onto the system here.
About 3 years ago, Bountiful City Power, we upgraded our maps to a GIS system, which is a geographic information system. And it allows us to not only put things on a map, but give us the information readily accessible. So what we've done, and this map, keep in mind, is only 3 years old since we started actually pinpointing all the poles that need to be transferred. We use 3 different colors to distinguish the 3 different utility, or 2 utilities. If it's blue, it's both. So blue is both CenturyLink and Comcast that need to transfer. Green is CenturyLink and yellow is Comcast. So I can zoom in and out in here and try not to make anybody seasick moving too fast. But again, all the blue is Comcast, all the green is CenturyLink, and yellow is Comcast only. So quick overview. Like Alan mentioned, that we've been notifying for several years. I mean, I've been with the power company 9 years, and there's still poles before my time that haven't been transferred. But this is just 3 years of pole transfers that need to be done, and it adds up to be just about 300 poles.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, Jesse.
Have they removed any poles upon your request?
Typically what happens is we tell them to transfer, and then if the contractor sees fit, the contractor they hired to do the transfer will remove the pole. But if they just tell us, we'll remove them ourselves too. So there has been some progress. It takes quite a bit of prodding and discussion to get things to happen. But yeah,
So they've done some, it's just kind of at their discretion at this point?
yeah. You can see on the south end of town quite a bit. Any other questions on that before I give it back to Alan? Thank you.
Anyway, just a printout. This isn't very many, but this is, as we actually met with them and told them we're concerned of what it was, they jumped right on and went out and took a look at some polls and come back and said, oh, we got this many that are completed. So we come back and sent the crews out to go pull them back. And you'll find that all the ones with colors on here were ones that they were saying were done that were not done. So we'd send a crew out to take the pole down, and obviously couldn't do it because they're still hooked onto it. Some of the things that has to be done when they do it, a lot of times it's just to drill one hole, move the wire and bolt it on and move the service drops. The ones that are really a bigger issue are the ones that where it would come down the pole to go underground. And those are a much bigger issue that's going to take them longer to do. I mean, so that in defense, there's a fair amount of work on some of them to make this change. But this is the concern that has been, is that we have worked with them. Most of my career, we've been both of the utilities of trying to get transfers done. But as we've come back in here and to make an attempt to upgrade the system, it's obviously they've fallen further behind. Some of the things that they wanted to do was to come in and put new cables on top. Our concern by putting new cable is already some of them are pretty decent size. You put this new fiber, and even though the fiber may not be itself very heavy, they're still leaving the copper, and it's 2 technologies as I understand. They still need some copper to still run the old phone system, and then they need the fiber to run the new internet type of facility. So they're looking at needing both. The problem is that makes the bundles bigger. Our concern is coming back in with our age of our poles, that we've told them that structurally strength, we don't think any are going to pass these old ones, and we don't want to take any additional liability for this additional wind loading or snow loading, unless they're taking weight down. We don't want to put any more weight on unless they want to go through a structural analysis. The problem is we've done a lot of poles. The reason why I wanted to kind of show you what Luke had is that we haven't started in one particular area in the city and just been working across. We've been going out and identifying the worst areas. If you remember 4 or 5 years ago now, we went out and had Osmos go through and test 100% of our poles. It took, excuse me, a couple of years to do that. And so we went in and found all the worst poles, the ones that looked the worst up on top, and started with those areas first. So we're sort of stepping strategically what makes sense for the power utility, not any one place. Like I say, we didn't start kind of like the fiber is. We're starting in the north end of town and working across. We took this neighborhood and this neighborhood and this neighborhood. So we checkerboarded through the area. And that was partially what I wanted to show you on Luke's map, where you'll see they're all over, because that's where we've been working, is all over to hit the worst areas. So the concern is coming in, changing poles would be a big process. And we think when they need to be done before we hook new cables and new weight onto it. As we know, we've been through 2 FEMA events, but we get a lot of windstorms. We don't want to take the liability when the wind comes of disrupting power, because we got poles that are aged and need more work by putting more weight onto them, if that makes sense. So, am I missing anything, Gary?
No, I think that's good. That is a summary of some of the major issues that we believe need to be addressed, and think that the franchise agreement at a minimum needs to be done in light of those. We may also want to consider a new pole attachment agreement. It's essentially been ignored. It's basically worthless now in practice. Wouldn't you agree, Alan?
Yeah, and it's, to be honest, it's been in since the 40s. And going back through history, back in the 40s, Bountiful owned half the poles, and actually Mountain Bell, or back when it was, the original, owned the other half. And they would actually set poles, change them out. Again, in the last 30 years, 35 years, I think they've only replaced 1 pole. So that hasn't happened in all the years. And as we've just been changing them, essentially as we change it out, we change the count, and we now own it as they've been just replaced. And once a year, we send a bill to them, and we basically charge them our pole attachment fee. And they look at what their poles are and deduct that from it. And basically, are billing them or giving them credit for the same thing we're doing to replace poles, but giving them credit for their poles and working their way down from us.
So with that, council, we just would like to hear what feedback you have for us as we begin this process, what questions you have as we start looking at a franchise agreement with them.
Since the agreements haven't really been followed, since they've been ignored, is it possible for us to wait on a new agreement until they come into compliance with the things that they have been needing to do for our polls?
That might be a question for Clint.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I feel more comfortable putting a little bit more thought to, but it's a good thought, and I would say give me some time to research it, and I can get back to you on it.
Mayor?
I have some grave concerns about moving forward with redoing an agreement with the kind of poor treatment that they have exercised in our city. I think it's appalling that they have ignored this infrastructure and want to just Band-Aid new solutions on top of it. We've set a real priority here on the city on making sure that our infrastructure is taken care of and upgraded. Sometimes that's a hard and not fun thing to do. Sometimes it requires us to increase fees that our residents don't love, but maintaining infrastructure so that residents can have good, dependable service is incredibly important. And I just don't feel like they've been a good partner. I think that's part of the reason we found ourselves needing to make changes with regard to fiber, is because we found that they had no capital plans for Bountiful. They were upfront in telling us that. And here it dramatically shows that they are so lacking in keeping their infrastructure up to date. So I think we need to completely revamp the franchise agreement and the pole attachment agreement. I think we need to take very seriously the backlog. And I'd also like to encourage that we take a look at our other franchise agreement to make sure that if we're updating the pole attachment agreement, it applies to the other carrier as well.
I'd like to agree with Councilmember Bradshaw. We recently wanted for fiber in our own city at additional cost to put it underground and not on our poles intentionally because of the age of the poles. It would have been cheaper for us to do it aerial. Can I ask a question? Is this a common practice or theme you hear across other cities that you collaborate with regarding power?
Yeah, it's actually not just in Utah, but where I deal a lot with the American Public Power Association. I was on the deed board for 6 years. This is a situation that you see nationwide. This is an issue. This isn't just local to Bountiful, it's Utah and really across the country.
Mr. Drake, what compels us to sign a new franchise agreement? Are there requirements?
Basically, anybody that wants to operate in the right of way, as long as they comply with the terms of our existing franchise agreement, then they can. The question is to Councilmember Bradshaw's point is, where they haven't complied in the past, what would compel us to do that in the future? It's a great question, and I'd like to look into that and see what our options are.
Could I ask a question? I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yes, we can hear you. Go right ahead.
Okay, well, first of all, I really want to thank Alan and all of the city staff for all of the incredible work that has gone into this presentation. It's really informative and I appreciate it a lot as a member of the council. I echo what my colleagues have said, and I'm really concerned with what Alan mentioned about the additional liability and risk that the additional weight and non-compliance places on our infrastructure. And clearly, as we are not, as members of the council, as experts in this arena, I would just want to verbalize that I put my full faith and trust in our staff members and power department to move forward with looking at what would be protecting our interests and our infrastructure as a city and our power infrastructure, and especially in light of what Clint said, that they have the right to operate in our right of ways, but we want to make sure that going forward that they are a good faith player in the marketplace. And I guess what I'm concerned about, and after that long statement, is this seems like this could put a real burden on staff and the power department moving forward. How can we request or require that that they pay for the cost of what this will entail in staff time on our end as a city to put together this a new agreement?
I appreciate that question. I don't think we have the ability to require them to pay for the staff time, but their emergency shouldn't dictate our priorities either as a city. We would hope to and would expect that we would treat them like anyone else through this process. But just because they're urgent doesn't mean we need to put our other priorities on hold. We'll be diligent with this. It's important, but it won't come at the expense of maintaining our power system, for example.
How concerning is it that when provided with a list of poles that that needed to be replaced, and they report, okay, great, they're done, and then our staff checks and says they're not. I mean, I feel like we are in a very trust but specifically verify. I find that incredibly disappointing.
It's frustrating.
Excuse me, that's a very good point. It's that trust factor is a very good point there.
That was actually my question, is if that had been addressed or if that had been pointed out in the meeting that you said these poles had been replaced, but and repaired, but when in actuality they had been not, or they had not been. But then, so I guess that's my first question. Then my second question is, when the meeting ended, was there any sort of timeline? Are they waiting on us? Are we waiting on them? Are they just waiting to hear what our overall expectations are, or where are we once this work session ends?
Well, obviously, we met, and coming back to the point that we recognize they don't have a franchise agreement shuts down a lot. But they actually intended to go out and do this, and they made points, and we got an email just within just a few days where they had gone out and done that. We sent crews out and responded within a week or so, and responded back to them that, you've sent this, but a good share of these haven't been done, and it's been radio silence.
There was no
silence that
accountability
sets
on
out
their
there, so.
part. It's too bad.
As for timing, they've requested a franchise agreement. They've given us a couple of draft franchise agreements that we've looked at a little bit. They aren't dictating that we use their drafts. We don't love the drafts that they've given us because we don't think they address the issues that we have, and they're open to that, but we did not set a time frame. Their expectation is that it be done as soon as possible. They're anxious.
As Clint is doing his research, is it possible for us to, provide some type of a fine structure in a franchise agreement when they fail to remove poles within a timely fashion? I mean, what's going to cure this if they've been ignoring requests for years and years and years to take care of this? What types of things might we be able to put inside this contract to ensure that we're going to get compliance, that our residents aren't going to be stuck with, 2 poles in their yard, or, a pole that might be slightly dangerous because it's deteriorating and has additional weight burden on it? I mean, I think that's important. So if we're suggesting some things for Clint to research, that would be one that I'd be interested in. I think if we're doing this, we should do it for any other parties that are on our polls as well, to make sure that if their franchise agreement has expired, or if we issue a new pole attachment agreement, that it applies to both, since the chart clearly showed a number of dual poles with problems.
I have another question. So in the 1936 agreement with them, page 9, paragraph 3, it talks about negligence and liability if something happens as a cause of negligence. If it's power related, does that mean it's our responsibility? It kind of delineates that.
Yeah,
But if it's
yes.
because of age of pole or lack of maintenance on their part because of weight, how does that come back and affect us?
Over the years, they have actually sent us bills indicating that you had something that went on that damaged our equipment, and we paid some. Most of them, we have argued with them that we haven't, but they have actually over the years have come back and wanted to say, well, your equipment, by wind or an animal or a line falling down or something, has shorted out and shorted our cable. We want you to, like the lashing that's burned off, we want you to be responsible for putting that back up. So that we've had those discussions over the years. Some of them we have paid if there was really something that our crews had an accident, something caused, we've obviously paid it. But the rest of them, we have not paid any of those, but they have come to us a number of times looking for.
Can we go to them for that same type of thing?
What we can, but it's trying to get through the process, to get through the payment. You finally get to the point you throw your hands up in the air, because we spend an awful lot of time going out every time we get a storm, for lines that are down. And some of the things that's happened is they upgrade it, and it might be that they were hooked to a phone system, and then you come to the cable company and they've just cut the wire and let it fall, had no fault of their own, but their lines are down all over the place, and then people don't really pay any attention until a storm comes and also, okay, I've got a line that's down. Trying to build them is really a tough animal to, number one, find who to get it to, and two, to get them to pay it. So
Well, we really appreciate that information. So we're asking our city attorney to look into this, see what next steps should be, see what we can do. And any other questions before we wrap up this work session?
I've got a few other ideas. I'll just email Clint for additional research that would be helpful, I think, before we're expecting to see this come back, if that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you all. We'll just take a quick break before we start our regular council meeting.
thank you.